A lonely mountain man trudges home through a snowstorm when he freezes at the sight before him. At his gate, an obese teenage girl, tied, gagged, and half frozen with the words "disgusting pig" painted across her torn dress. He cuts her free, thinking it's just an act of mercy. But the moment she whispers who left her there, his quiet life on the mountain is shattered forever. Because her own kin did it. And they'll do worse to anyone who stands in their way. Now, a man who hasn't prayed in years must decide if he'll risk everything to protect the one person the world calls worthless. As church bells toll and the sheriff's boots echo on the boardwalk, whispers spread through town. Who is this girl really? And what secret buried in her blood could burn every lie the frontier was built on? When the law turns its back and the night catches fire, will one act of mercy be enough to save them both? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. Through the howling winter wind, Hunter's cabin offered meager shelter from the brutal cold. The lone lantern cast wavering shadows across rough-hewn walls as he gently laid Temperance on his narrow cot. Her skin felt like ice beneath his calloused hands. The tar message on her dress made his jaw clench. Such cruelty spoke of hatred deeper than the snow outside. "Need to get you warm," he muttered, more to himself than to her. His voice was rough from disuse. Hunter stoked the dying fire, adding fresh pine logs until flames crackled and popped. The familiar scent of wood smoke filled the one-room cabin. Temperance huddled beneath Sarah's old quilt, her eyes wide with fear. The patchwork squares, blues, and reds his wife had loved seemed to embrace the shivering girl. Hunter's throat tightened at the sight. He hadn't touched that quilt since Sarah passed. "I can't go back," Temperance whispered. Her words quavered like aspen leaves. "Please. They'll only do worse next time." Hunter nodded slowly, studying her face. Beneath the dirt and tear tracks, he saw features that spoke of mixed blood. High Cherokee cheekbones alongside her father's Irish coloring. The kind of heritage that brought trouble in these parts, especially from small-minded men. He moved to his crude kitchen area, keeping his movements steady and predictable. No sudden gestures to startle her further. "Got some rabbit stew left? Need to get something warm in you." The iron pot still held yesterday's leftovers. He added water and set it to heat. While the stew warmed, Hunter gathered his medical supplies, what little he had. Clean rags, whiskey for disinfecting, Sarah's sewing kit with needle and thread. The rope burns on Temperance's wrists needed tending. "Mind if I look at those hands?" he asked quietly. When she gave a slight nod, he sat on the edge of the cot and carefully examined her fingers. The skin was angry red and beginning to blister from the cold, but no signs of frostbite yet. "Can you feel this?" He gently pressed each fingertip. "Yes," she whispered. "It hurts, but I can feel them all." "Good." He began cleaning the rope burns with whiskey-soaked cloth. Temperance hissed, but didn't pull away. "Whoever did this, they work for your father?" Her silence was answer enough. Hunter had heard tales of Seamus O'Hara, the valley's biggest rancher. None of them kind. "The Finch brothers?" she finally said, voice barely audible above the wind. "Caleb and Rory. Father's men." She swallowed hard. They said I needed to learn my place, that I was an embarrassment to the O'Hara name." Hunter's hands stilled for a moment as anger coursed through him. He'd seen his share of frontier justice, but this was pure meanness. "Your father put them up to it?" Temperance's eyes filled with tears. "He didn't stop them. Said maybe it would teach me some humility." A sob caught in her throat. I heard them planning worse. That's why I can't go back. Please don't make me go back." The stew began to bubble. Hunter rose to tend it, needing a moment to master his rage. He'd left civilization behind years ago to escape such cruelty. Now it had followed him up the mountain, wrapped in tar and rope. He poured a bowl of stew and brought it to Temperance, helping her sit up. Her hands shook too badly to hold the spoon, so he steadied it for her. "Small bites," he cautioned. "Your stomach needs to remember food." As she ate, Hunter studied his cabin with new eyes. One room, sparse furnishings, pelts drying on the walls. No place for a young woman, but better than whatever waited in the valley below. The wind rattled the shutters, reminding him of the storm's fury. "Storm's got at least another day," he said. "No one's following tracks in this weather." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "After that, we'll figure something out. But you won't be going back there. I give you my word." Temperance's shoulders sagged with relief. She finished the last spoonful of stew, color finally returning to her cheeks. "Thank you," she murmured. "I didn't know if—" Her voice trailed off. "If anyone would help?" Hunter took the empty bowl. "Been asking myself the same thing, truth be told. Been up here alone so long, sometimes I forget what being human means." He glanced at Sarah's quilt, remembering promises made long ago. "But I made a choice when I found you. No one dies at my gate." The lantern flickered as wind found new cracks to whistle through. Hunter added more wood to the fire, then gathered his bedroll from the corner. He'd sleep on the floor near the hearth, close enough to tend the flames but far enough to give Temperance space. "Try to rest," he said, settling onto his bedroll. "You're safe here." Temperance clutched the quilt tighter. "What if they come looking?" "Let them come." Hunter's voice held steel. "I know these mountains. Know how to disappear into them. Been doing it for years." He checked his rifle before laying it within easy reach. "But first, we need to see to your healing, both inside and out." The storm raged through the night, but inside the cabin, warmth slowly returned to Temperance's body. Hunter kept watch, his mind turning over possibilities. He'd walked away from the world's troubles once before, choosing solitude over engagement. But finding Temperance changed everything. Some injustices couldn't be ignored. As dawn approached, the wind began to ease. Hunter rose to check his snares. They'd need fresh meat. At the door, he paused, looking back at the sleeping girl. Her face was peaceful now, free from fear for the first time since he'd found her. "I reckon we both got some healing to do," he whispered, then stepped out into the snowy morning, ready to face whatever changes this day might bring. The sun was barely visible through the thick clouds, but its pale light revealed fresh snow blanketing the world in pristine white. Hunter's boots crunched through the crust as he made his rounds, checking his trap lines and gathering more firewood. His mind wandered to practical matters. They'd need more supplies, especially if Temperance was staying. The nearest trading post was 2 days' ride, and that was in good weather. Back inside, he found Temperance awake, sitting up in the cot. She'd folded the quilt with careful precision, her fingers tracing the stitching. "Your wife's?" she asked softly. Hunter nodded, hanging his snow-covered coat by the door. "Sarah. Lost her to fever 4 winters back." The words still caught in his throat. "She was a fine woman. Kind. Would have known better what to do for you than this old mountain man." "You've done plenty," Temperance said. "More than anyone else would have." She attempted to stand, but swayed slightly. Hunter steadied her with a gentle hand. "Easy now. You're still weak from the cold." He helped her back to the cot. "We've got time to sort things out. Storm's passing, but there's plenty of snow to keep folks busy in the valley." Temperance's face clouded at the mention of the valley. "They'll be looking for me soon. Father won't let this go, he never does." Fear crept back into her voice. "The Finch brothers know these mountains too." "Not like I do." Hunter began preparing breakfast, cornmeal mush with dried berries. "And they don't know about all the old mining trails or the caves up higher. If needed, we can vanish where they'd never think to look." As they ate, Hunter outlined his immediate plans. They'd need to stay put for a few days while Temperance regained her strength. Meanwhile, he'd set false trails, make it look like he'd gone down to the valley for supplies. Let the Finch brothers chase shadows while they figured out their next move. "Might be we can reach out to your mother's people," he suggested carefully, watching her reaction. "Cherokee Nation's got settlements east of here." Temperance shook her head. "Mother's family is gone. Moved west years ago, after the soldiers came." Her hands twisted in her lap. "Father married her for her land claims. Once those were his, he—" She couldn't finish. Hunter understood. He'd seen it before. Men who viewed marriage and family as mere transactions, tools for building their empires. "Then we'll find another way," he said firmly. "There's always another way, if you look hard enough." The morning wore on, filled with small tasks. Hunter showed Temperance how to tend the fire, where he kept his supplies, which plants in his dried herb collection could be used for medicine. She proved a quick study, eager to be useful. By midday, she was helping him prepare new candles from rendered tallow, her hands steady despite the lingering rope burns. "Seems like you know your way around a household," Hunter observed as they worked. A shadow crossed Temperance's face. "Mother taught me before. After she was gone, Father said such skills were beneath an O'Hara, said I should be learning to run the ranch instead." Her voice grew bitter. "But he never really meant that either. Just wanted to remind me I wasn't good enough for anything." Hunter's hands stilled over the candle molds. "Your father's wrong," he said quietly but firmly. "About all of it. What you can do, who you are, that's not his to decide." Temperance looked up, surprised by the conviction in his voice. For a moment, neither spoke, letting the truth of those words settle between them. Then Hunter cleared his throat and returned to their task. But something had shifted in the cabin's atmosphere. A foundation of trust was being built, word by word, moment by moment. Outside, the storm's fury had spent itself. The afternoon sun broke through the clouds, making the snow-covered landscape sparkle like diamonds. But Hunter knew the beauty was deceptive. Beneath that pristine surface lay treacherous depths, just as the peace of this moment masked the challenges ahead. For now, though, they had shelter, food, and the beginning of understanding. It would have to be enough. Morning crept over the mountains, pale and hesitant. Hunter stirred the embers and added fresh logs, watching as Temperance slept fitfully on his narrow cot. The cruel words painted across her dress seemed darker in the growing light, each letter a fresh wound. His hands shook as he lifted the heavy iron pot onto the stove. While the water heated, he rummaged through Sarah's old trunk, movements careful and reverent. At the bottom lay a flannel dress, blue as summer cornflowers, preserved in brown paper. He traced the fabric with weathered fingers before setting it aside. "Miss Temperance," he called softly, not wanting to startle her. "Water's almost ready." She stirred, eyes opening wide with momentary fear before recognition settled in. Thank you, Mr. Boone." "Hunter," he corrected gently. "Just Hunter." He gestured to the steaming pot and the rough bar of lye soap on the table. "Thought we might see about getting that tar off you." Temperance's hand went to her dress, fingers tracing the cruel letters. Tears welled in her eyes. but she blinked them back. "I can manage." "Reckon you can't reach all of it properly," Hunter said, his voice gruff with awkwardness. "I'll help with what you can't reach, then leave you be to finish." He paused. "Had to clean tar off trap lines before. Know how to do it gentle-like." She nodded, understanding his meaning. Hunter poured the hot water into his largest basin, adding cooler water until the temperature was right. His movements were methodical, practiced like everything else in his solitary life. But his hands trembled slightly as he dipped the cloth in the water. "Might sting some," he warned, beginning with her shoulders where the tar had soaked through the dress. The lye soap was harsh, but it was all he had. Temperance winced, but didn't pull away. As he worked, she spoke in broken phrases about what had happened. Her father had dragged her before the whole town, shouting about her being fat and lazy, a disgrace to the O'Hara name. "Said I ate too much," she whispered. "Said I was worthless except for the land Mother left me." Hunter's jaw tightened, but he kept his movements steady, gentle. "Man like that wouldn't know true worth if it kicked him in the teeth," he said quietly. "I ran," Temperance continued. "Made it almost to the creek before the Finch brothers caught me." Her voice caught. "They laughed while they tied me up. Said Father told them to teach me a lesson I wouldn't forget." Hunter dipped the cloth again, working at a stubborn spot of tar. "Those brothers always were more muscle than morals," he said. "Done their share of dirty work for your father over the years." The sun climbed higher as they worked, filling the cabin with pale winter light. Hunter could see the bruises now, purple-black against her skin where the ropes had bit deep. Each mark told its own story of cruelty, of hands that should have shown kindness dealing out pain instead. When he'd done what he could, Hunter stepped back. "There's more hot water in the pot," he said, placing Sarah's dress on the cot. "Take what time you need. I'll be outside, checking my trap lines." Outside, the snow was still falling, thick and steady. Hunter split wood until his arms ached, each swing of the axe carrying the weight of his anger. The sound echoed across the white landscape, startling a pair of ravens from their perch. He stacked the wood mechanically, his eyes drawn again and again to the cabin window. Temperance's shadow moved behind the curtain, a reminder that his solitary world had shifted. The silence that had been his comfort for so long felt different now, charged with possibility and worry. When he finally returned inside, Temperance was wearing Sarah's dress. It hung loose on her frame, but the blue brought out something gentle in her face. She'd managed to wash most of the tar away, though faint traces still stained her skin like shadows. "Found some broth in the root cellar," Hunter said, hanging his snow-covered coat by the door. "Best get something warm in you." While the broth heated, Temperance sat close to the fire, her hands wrapped around a tin cup of coffee. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything. I know taking me in brings trouble to your door." Hunter stirred the pot slowly. "Trouble was already there when I found you in the snow." He poured the steaming broth into a bowl. "Besides, ain't right what they did. Man's supposed to protect his kin, not—" He trailed off, the words sticking in his throat. "Father says I bring shame to him," Temperance whispered. "Says no man will ever want a wife as big as me, that I'm a burden, using up resources better spent elsewhere." Her voice wavered between shame and a deeper hurt, the kind that comes from believing cruel words spoken by those who should love you. Hunter set the bowl in front of her. "Your father's wrong," he said firmly. "Dead wrong, about all of it." He hesitated, then added, "You can stay here long as you need, until you're stronger, until we figure something out." Temperance's eyes filled with tears, but this time they spilled over. "I don't know how to thank you." "No need," Hunter said gruffly. "Just eat your broth. Get your strength back." He busied himself with small tasks, checking his rifle, mending a tear in his coat, organizing his trap supplies. But his awareness stayed fixed on his unexpected guest, noting how she wrapped Sarah's old shawl tighter around her shoulders, how she slowly relaxed into the chair's embrace. The snow kept falling outside, thick curtains of white that would keep the valley folk busy with their own concerns for a while. Hunter found himself grateful for it, though winter storms usually meant lean times for a trapper. Today, the snow felt like protection, a blank page covering their tracks. Through the window, he watched the flakes swirl and dance. The quiet that had been his constant companion these past years felt different now. No longer empty, but filled with silent questions. The sound of Temperance's breathing, the soft clink of her spoon against the bowl, the rustle of fabric as she moved. All of it changed the texture of his solitude. For the first time since Sarah's death, the silence in his cabin felt alive. It scared him, this sudden awareness of another person's presence. But watching Temperance's shadow move in the lamplight, Hunter knew he couldn't have done anything different. Some choices, once made, became turning points. Finding her at his gate was one of those moments. He added another log to the fire, listening to its comfortable crackle. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but for now, they were safe. The storm would keep them hidden while Temperance healed, while they both figured out what came next. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the cabin's windows. Hunter checked his wood supply, mentally, calculating how long it would last. He'd need to cut more soon, especially with 2 people to keep warm. The thought didn't bother him as much as it should have. The days stretched like taffy, slow and sweet. Hunter found himself adjusting to Temperance's presence in his cabin, the way sunlight adjusts to clouds, gradual, inevitable. She didn't take up much space, but she filled the silence with something he'd forgotten: life. On the 3rd morning, he woke to find her already up, attempting to mend a tear in one of his wool shirts. Her stitches were neat and small, practiced from years of necessity. "Didn't have to do that," he said, pulling on his boots. "Please," she replied, not looking up from her work. "Let me help somehow. I can't just sit here doing nothing while you take care of everything." Hunter nodded, understanding the need to feel useful. "Reckon there's plenty needs doing around here," he admitted. "Been a while since anyone's given this place a proper woman's touch." That afternoon, Temperance took over the cooking. Hunter watched from his workbench as she moved around his small kitchen, humming softly while she prepared a venison stew. The sound reminded him of spring birds returning after a long winter. "My mother taught me to cook," she said, adding dried herbs to the pot. Before she passed, said every meal should have a pinch of love in it. Her voice caught slightly on the word mother, but she kept stirring. The stew burned that first night, the bottom turning black as coal. Hunter saw Temperance's face fall when she lifted the lid, shame flooding her cheeks. Without hesitation, he filled his bowl and ate every bite, careful to keep his expression neutral. "Good stew," he said when he finished. "Been a while since I had anything but my own cooking." Her smile, when it came, lit up her whole face. It startled him, that smile, like sunshine breaking through storm clouds. He hadn't expected laughter could live in someone who'd been through so much. The next morning brought heavy snow, thick flakes falling like goose down. By midday, the drifts were too deep for Hunter to check his trap lines. The storm sealed them in, turning the cabin into an island in a sea of white. They sat by the fire that evening, the wind howling outside like a hungry wolf. Temperance worked on mending while Hunter cleaned his rifle, the familiar motions soothing in their routine. The silence between them felt comfortable now, less like a wall and more like a shared blanket. "Tell me about your mother," Hunter said finally, surprising himself. He wasn't used to asking personal questions, but something about the storm's isolation made it easier. Temperance's hands stilled in her lap. "She was Cherokee," she said softly. "Met Father when he was surveying land near her people's settlement. She used to say he was different then. Gentler. That love changed him." She shook her head. "But after she died, he changed again. Started twisting scripture to suit his meanness." "How so?" Hunter asked, setting aside his rifle. He'd quote verses about discipline, about sparing the rod. Her voice grew tight. "Said my size was a sin of gluttony, that he was saving my soul by—" She stopped, swallowing hard. "By making me go hungry sometimes. Said the Bible commanded children to honor their parents, so my tears were blasphemy." Hunter's hands clenched. He'd known men like that, who used God's words as weapons. "That ain't scripture," he said roughly. "That's just cruelty wearing a holy mask." "I know that now," Temperance said. "But when you're young, and it's your father saying these things—" She trailed off, staring into the fire. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the crack and pop of burning wood. Finally, Hunter spoke, his voice low. "Lost my wife, Clara, to fever," he said. 3 years back. Prayed harder than I ever had, but she slipped away anyway." He picked up a piece of kindling, turning it in his hands. "Haven't said a prayer since. Figured God wasn't listening, or maybe I wasn't worth listening to." "I'm sorry," Temperance said softly. "About Clara, and about your prayers." Hunter nodded, not trusting himself to speak. The fire needed feeding, so he busied himself with that, letting the familiar task steady his hands. "Maybe," Temperance said carefully, "God answers prayers different than we expect. Maybe sometimes the answer looks like a stranger's kindness on a snowy night." Hunter glanced at her, surprised by the wisdom in her words. She wasn't the scared girl he'd found at his gate anymore. Or maybe she was both, scared and strong, broken and healing, all at once. The storm raged for 2 days, keeping them confined to the cabin's warmth. They fell into a rhythm, Hunter tending the fire and checking his supplies, Temperance cooking and mending. She swept the hearth until it gleamed, organized his scattered tools, and somehow made the small space feel more like a home than it had in years. When the storm finally broke, the world outside was transformed. Everything lay buried under a blanket of white, pristine and peaceful. The morning sun turned the snow into diamonds, almost too bright to look at. Hunter stood in the doorway, watching as Temperance stepped out with his spare shovel. She began clearing a path to the woodpile, her breath making clouds in the crystal air. The work was hard, but she didn't complain, attacking each drift with determination. Something ached in his chest as he watched her. Not the sharp pain of grief he'd carried since Clara, but something different. Something that felt like spring thaw after a long winter. Like the first green shoots pushing through frozen ground. He recognized it for what it was. The return of companionship, the slow awakening of his heart from its long sleep. It scared him, this feeling. Made him want to retreat back into his solitude where things were simple, predictable. But then Temperance looked up from her work, cheeks flushed with effort, and smiled that sunrise smile of hers. "Beautiful morning," she called, gesturing at the glittering landscape. Hunter found himself nodding. "That it is," he agreed, and stepped out to help her shovel. They worked side by side in the crisp morning air, their shovels scraping in rhythm. Neither spoke much, but the silence between them had changed. It was no longer the empty quiet of loneliness, but something warmer, like the comfortable silence between old friends or family. As the sun climbed higher, Hunter watched Temperance attack another drift, her movements strong and sure despite everything she'd been through. She was healing, he realized. Not just the rope burns on her wrists or the bruises on her arms, but something deeper. Her spirit was mending, like a broken bone knitting itself back together. And maybe, he thought, watching her work, he was healing too. 2 weeks passed like water flowing in a mountain stream. The late February sun grew stronger each day, and patches of bare ground began showing through the melting snow. Inside the cabin, Hunter and Temperance had settled into an easy rhythm, their days filled with shared work and comfortable silences. That afternoon, Hunter was teaching Temperance how to repair a broken trap when they heard hoofbeats approaching. The sound echoed off the mountainside, growing louder with each beat. Hunter's hand moved instantly to his rifle, and Temperance's face went pale. "Back room," Hunter whispered, already moving towards the door. Temperance nodded and slipped away quietly, her mending forgotten on the chair. The rider came into view, a deputy Hunter recognized from town, young Billy Matthews. The man's horse was lathered from the climb, steam rising from its flanks in the cool air. Hunter stepped onto the porch, rifle held casually but ready. "Afternoon," Hunter called out, his voice neutral. The deputy dismounted, his boots crunching in the crusty snow. "Mr. Boone," Deputy Matthews touched the brim of his hat. He was trying to look official, but Hunter could see the nervousness in his eyes. "Got business from town." "That so?" Hunter kept his tone even, though his heart was pounding. "Must be important to bring you all the way up here." The deputy reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper. The official seal of the territory court was visible even from the porch. "Got a warrant here," Matthews said, holding it out. "For the O'Hara girl, her father's pressing charges." Hunter didn't move to take the paper. "What charges?" "Theft and—" Matthews cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. "Lewd conduct. Mr. O'Hara claims she stole money from his lockbox and was seen acting inappropriately with some cowboys in town." Hunter's jaw clenched. He'd seen the rope burns on Temperance's wrists, the bruises that were only now fading. He knew what kind of man would make up such lies about his own daughter. "That's quite a story," Hunter said coldly. "Got any proof besides her father's word?" "Sir, I need to search the premises." Matthews tried to sound authoritative, but his voice wavered. "If you're harboring her, that makes you an accessory. Could mean jail time." A floorboard creaked behind Hunter, and he heard Temperance's sharp intake of breath. He turned to see her standing in the doorway, her hands gripping the frame so hard her knuckles were white. "I didn't steal anything," she said, her voice trembling but clear. "And I wouldn't—" She couldn't finish, tears welling in her eyes. Hunter moved to stand between her and the deputy. "You got witnesses to these supposed crimes?" he demanded. "Got any evidence at all besides the word of a man who'd leave his own flesh and blood tied up in a snowstorm?" Matthews shifted uncomfortably. "Mr. O'Hara's an important man in the county. His word carries weight." "More weight than the truth?" Hunter's voice was dangerous now, quiet as a mountain lion before it strikes. "More weight than what's right." "Look, Mr. Boone," Matthews said, "I'm just doing my job. Sheriff says—" "Sheriff says what?" Hunter cut him off. "That it's fine to drag a girl back to the man who tried to kill her. That money matters more than justice." The deputy's hand strayed toward his gun, but Hunter's rifle was already at his shoulder. "I wouldn't," Hunter said softly. "Not unless you're aiming to explain to your mama why you died trying to help a cruel man torture his daughter." They stood frozen for a long moment, the only sound the wind in the pines and Temperance's quiet crying. Finally, Matthews let his hand fall away from his gun. Sheriff Talley will come next time, he warned, backing toward his horse. He won't take no for an answer. Then he better bring proof, Hunter replied. Real proof, not just a rich man's lies. They watched as the deputy mounted up and rode away, his horse's hooves kicking up slush from the melting snow. Only when he was out of sight did Hunter lower his rifle. Temperance had sunk to her knees in the doorway, her whole body shaking. "They'll come back," she whispered. "They'll take me away, and Father will—" She couldn't continue. Hunter knelt beside her, setting his rifle aside. "Look at me," he said gently. When she raised her tear-stained face, he continued, "You can stay here as long as you want. Long as you're willing to work and pray for strength, this cabin's your home." "But they'll arrest you," she protested. "I can't let you risk that for me." "Already made my choice," Hunter said firmly. "Made it the night I found you at my gate. Ain't turning back now." Temperance stared at him, wonder mixing with the fear in her eyes. "Why?" she asked softly. "Why help me when it could cost you everything?" Hunter was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the mountainside where patches of earth were emerging from the melting snow. "Because sometimes," he said finally, "doing what's right means standing against what's legal. And because no one deserves to live in fear, especially not of their own kin." They spent the rest of the afternoon in tense silence, jumping at every sound from the forest. As darkness fell, Hunter built up the fire and checked his ammunition. Temperance made a simple supper of cornbread and beans, but neither had much appetite. When the dishes were cleared away, Temperance knelt by the fireplace. The flames cast flickering shadows on her face as she closed her eyes and folded her hands. "Dear Lord," she began softly, "thank you for bringing me to this place, to this good man who showed me kindness when I needed it most. Please give us both strength for what's coming. Help me to be brave, and help Hunter to keep his faith even when the path ahead looks dark." Hunter stood in the shadows, listening. His own prayers had died with Clara, turned to ash like everything else he'd believed in. But something in Temperance's simple words touched him, made him remember what it was like to believe in something bigger than himself. "And Lord," Temperance continued, her voice growing stronger, "if it be your will, protect us from those who would harm us. Show them the truth, open their hearts to mercy. But if trouble comes, help us face it with courage and wisdom." She fell silent then, but remained kneeling, tears sliding down her cheeks in the firelight. Hunter watched her, feeling the conflict in his own heart, the fear of what was coming warring with his determination to protect her, his lost faith struggling against the stirring of something that felt like hope. Finally, Temperance rose and wiped her eyes. She looked at Hunter, managing a small smile. "Whatever happens," she said quietly, "I want you to know that these weeks here, they've meant everything to me. You've shown me what real Christian kindness looks like, not the twisted version my father taught." Hunter nodded, not trusting himself to speak. He moved to the window, checking the darkness beyond. The moon was rising, casting silver light on the melting snow. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled, a lonely sound that seemed to echo his own uncertainty. But when he looked back at Temperance, seeing her strength despite her fear, he knew he'd made the right choice. Whatever came next, they would face it together, with work, with prayer, and with the quiet courage that grows in hearts that choose mercy over fear. The wagon wheels creaked as Hunter guided the horses down the mountain path toward Silver Creek. Spring sunshine warmed the air, but Temperance huddled deeper into the faded quilt wrapped around her shoulders. Her fingers traced the familiar pattern of stars and diamonds that Clara had sewn years ago. "Ain't no shame in being scared," Hunter said quietly, keeping his eyes on the road. "But sometimes facing folks head-on is the only way forward." Temperance nodded, though her heart hammered against her ribs. I know, and we need supplies. She managed a weak smile. Can't live on rabbit stew forever. The first buildings of Silver Creek came into view. The livery stable, the blacksmith's shop with its ringing anvil, the white-painted church spire rising above the pines. Hunter felt Temperance tense beside him as they rolled onto the main street. Mrs. Peterson and Mrs. Whitaker stood outside the millinery shop, their heads bent together in conversation. When they spotted the wagon, their whispers grew more urgent. Mrs. Peterson made the sign of the cross. Ain't Christian-like, Hunter muttered, his jaw tight, judging without knowing. They passed the telegraph office where Mr. Collins was sweeping the boardwalk. He stopped mid-stroke, staring openly at Temperance. Two cowboys lounging outside the saloon nudged each other, grinning. Hunter pulled the wagon up in front of Henderson's general store. Wait here, he said, helping Temperance down. I'll get what we need quick as I can. The bell above the door jangled as they entered. Mr. Henderson looked up from his ledger, his friendly smile faltering when he saw Temperance. Mr. Boone, he said stiffly. What can I help you with today? Hunter produced his list. Need flour, coffee, sugar, some yard goods too if you've got any sturdy cotton. Henderson's eyes darted between them. Perhaps the young lady should wait outside while we conduct business. She stays with me, Hunter said firmly. Mr. Boone, I have a reputation to consider. There's been talk. Talk ain't truth, Hunter cut in, his voice low but sharp as a knife. You known me 15 years, Tom. When have I ever given you cause to doubt my word? Henderson shifted uncomfortably. It's not that simple. Mr. O'Hara has money, that what you mean? Hunter's hand clenched on the counter. More than truth's worth? Temperance touched his arm. It's all right, she whispered, though her cheeks burned with shame. I'll wait by the wagon. Before Hunter could protest, she hurried outside. The spring breeze caught her skirts, but it couldn't cool the humiliation that made her throat tight with unshed tears. She ducked behind the wagon, pressing her face against the rough wood. A gentle hand touched her shoulder. Child, why do you hide? Temperance turned to find a tall woman with silver-streaked black hair and kind eyes. Her dark calico dress was neat but worn, and she carried a basket of herbs. Mrs. Greyfeather, Temperance managed, recognizing the half-Cherokee midwife she'd seen at church before her father forbade her attendance. I know that quilt, Mrs. Greyfeather said softly, her fingers brushing the faded fabric. I helped Clara piece it together the winter before she died. I was there when the fever took her, trying every remedy I knew. She studied Temperance's face. You're staying with Hunter now? Temperance nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Good. Mrs. Greyfeather's smile was warm as summer rain. That man has a true heart, though grief nearly buried it. Perhaps the Creator knew you both needed healing. The store door banged open. Hunter emerged, carrying supplies and radiating anger. His expression softened when he saw Mrs. Greyfeather. Ada, he said, nodding respectfully. Been too long. That it has. She touched the quilt again. Clara would be glad to see it keeping another soul warm. Hunter's eyes grew distant. Reckon she would at that. Mrs. Greyfeather lowered her voice. Trouble's brewing, Hunter. I hear things, working between town and the Cherokee settlement. If you need help? She glanced meaningfully towards the mountains. My cabin's always open to those seeking shelter from storms. Much obliged, Hunter said quietly. The Creator gives us trials, Mrs. Greyfeather continued, but also sends us friends to help bear them. She squeezed Temperance's hand. Remember that, child. You're not alone. They watched her walk away, her basket swaying gently. Hunter loaded the supplies while Temperance climbed back onto the wagon seat. As they left town, she could still feel the stairs following them, heavy as storm clouds. The horses picked their way up the mountain trail, hooves clopping steadily on the packed earth. Neither Hunter nor Temperance spoke until the town disappeared behind a bend. "I'm sorry," Temperance said finally, "for bringing trouble to your door, for making people look at you that way." Hunter was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said, "Ain't your fault. People choosing hate over understanding. Besides," he cleared his throat, "reckon having you around has done me more good than harm." Tears pricked Temperance's eyes, but these were different from the ones she'd held back in town. These felt like relief, like gratitude. The wagon crested a rise, and the valley spread out below them, painted in spring green and touched with late afternoon gold. A hawk circled overhead, riding the wind currents with effortless grace. Hunter pulled the wagon to a stop, letting the horses rest. He looked at Temperance, seeing not just her fear, but the quiet strength beneath it, the same strength he'd glimpsed that first night at his gate. For the first time since Clara died, words of prayer rose naturally to his lips. He didn't speak them aloud, but in his heart he whispered, "Lord, show me what's right." The answer seemed to come in the way the sunlight touched Temperance's face, in the memory of Mrs. Greyfeather's kind wisdom, in the weight of Clara's quilt across Temperance's shoulders. Sometimes doing right meant standing alone against the world's judgment. Sometimes it meant offering shelter to those the world cast out. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun sank lower, painting the clouds in shades of rose and gold. Finally, Hunter clicked to the horses, and they started the last stretch home to the cabin. Neither knew what trials lay ahead, but something had shifted between them during the day's journey. They were no longer just two lonely souls seeking shelter. They were family, chosen and true, bound together by mercy and trust. And if trouble came, well, they'd face it together, with work and prayer and the quiet strength that grows in hearts that choose love over fear. The days melted one into another like snow in spring sunshine. Temperance found her hands were rarely idle now, and she was grateful for it. Work kept the dark thoughts at bay, thoughts of her father's anger, of the cruel words painted on her dress, of the townspeople's whispers. In the small garden plot behind Hunter's cabin, she coaxed tender shoots from the thawing earth. The soil was rocky, but her mother had taught her how to tend growing things before she passed. Temperance knelt in the dirt, carefully transplanting the seedlings she'd started in tin cans on the windowsill. "You're good with plants," Hunter observed one afternoon, pausing on his way to check his trap lines. "Mama always said everything needs patience to grow strong," Temperance replied, patting soil around a fragile tomato plant. "Even people." Inside the cabin, fresh-baked bread cooled on the rough-hewn table. The yeasty smell filled the small space, making it feel more like a home than a hermit's shelter. New curtains, sewn from flour sacks she'd carefully bleached and hemmed, fluttered at the single window. But night brought different thoughts. As shadows crept across the cabin floor, Temperance lay in her bedroll near the fireplace, listening to Hunter's restless movements in his corner. His muttered words reached her ears. "What'll folks think? Man my age? Ain't proper?" Each word twisted in her chest like a knife. She'd thought she'd found sanctuary here, but now shame crept back in like frost. She was a burden again, making a respectable man risk his reputation just by showing kindness. Sleep eluded her. As pale dawn light filtered through her homemade curtains, Temperance made her decision. She waited until Hunter went to feed the horses, then quickly gathered a few belongings into a small flour sack. The dress he'd given her, a heel of bread, a tin cup. Her hands trembled as she folded Clara's quilt and laid it carefully on Hunter's bed. A tear splashed onto the faded fabric, but she wiped it away quickly. Better to leave now, before he had to ask her to go. The morning air bit sharp and clean as Temperance slipped out the cabin door. Dew sparkled on the new grass, and somewhere a meadowlark trilled. She'd made it halfway to the gate when heavy footsteps crunched behind her. Going somewhere? She froze, clutching her makeshift bundle. Hunter stood there, arms crossed, his expression unreadable in the early light. "I heard you last night," Temperance whispered. "About what people think. I don't want to cause you trouble." "If I cared what folks thought," Hunter cut in, his voice gruff but gentle, "I'd have died alone up here already." The simple truth in his words broke something loose inside her. Tears spilled down her cheeks as relief and gratitude washed through her like a spring flood. Hunter shifted uncomfortably, then cleared his throat. "Horses need feeding. Could use some help if you're staying." Temperance nodded, unable to speak. She set down her bundle and followed him to the stable, wiping her eyes on her sleeve. The horses nickered softly as they entered. Hunter showed her how to measure out the oats, how to check for stones in their hooves. His hands were sure and gentle with the animals, and Temperance found herself watching how they trusted him completely. "Sometimes," Hunter said as they worked, "doing right by others means not caring what the rest of the world thinks about it." He paused, curry brush suspended over his mare's flanks. "My Clara taught me that. She married me when everyone said I was too rough, too wild for a preacher's daughter." Temperance absorbed this piece of his past, this glimpse of the love he'd lost. "She sounds brave." She was. A ghost of a smile touched his weathered face. "Reckoned she'd be pleased to see her garden growing again." They finished the morning chores in comfortable silence. After a breakfast of cornbread and coffee, Hunter announced they needed to ride down to Mrs. Greyfeather's for medicine. His winter stores of willow bark and other remedies were running low. The spring wind rushed warm and strong through the valley as they rode, carrying the scent of pine and new grass. Temperance sat easily in her saddle now. Hunter had been teaching her to ride properly, not just perch sideways as her father had insisted was ladylike. "Mind that loose rein," Hunter reminded her as they picked their way down the mountain trail. "Let her find her footing." Temperance nodded, relaxing her grip. The mare beneath her stepped surely over the rocky ground, and Temperance felt her own confidence growing with each mile. They passed the spot where the valley opened up, where they'd paused that day returning from town. Now wildflowers dotted the meadow, Indian paintbrush and blue lupine nodding in the breeze. A red-tailed hawk wheeled overhead, its cry carrying clear and wild across the spring sky. "Beautiful morning for a ride," Temperance said, breathing in deeply. Hunter made a sound of agreement. "Sky's promising fair weather." He glanced at her sidelong. "Good day for being exactly where you're meant to be." Temperance felt warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the spring sunshine. She wasn't just a burden to be endured. She was where she belonged. Mrs. Greyfeather's cabin sat in a small clearing, smoke rising from its chimney. A patch of herbs grew neat and ordered beside the door, and strings of drying plants hung from the porch rafters. The woman herself appeared in the doorway as they dismounted, as if she'd been expecting them. "I was just putting coffee on," she said with a smile. "Come in, both of you." Inside, the cabin smelled of sage and sweet grass. Bundles of herbs hung from the ceiling beams, and shelves lined with bottles and jars covered one wall. Mrs. Greyfeather moved with quiet efficiency, pouring coffee into tin cups, while Hunter listed the medicines he needed. Willow bark for pain, yarrow for wounds. Mrs. Greyfeather nodded, gathering supplies. And I'll add some elderberry syrup. Good for what ails you, as my grandmother used to say. She paused, studying Temperance. You look stronger than when I saw you in town. Mountain air agrees with you. It does, Temperance said softly. Everything does. Mrs. Greyfeather's dark eyes were kind. Good medicine isn't just herbs and tinctures. Sometimes it's finding where your spirit can heal. As she wrapped the remedies in brown paper, Mrs. Greyfeather spoke of other things. Weather patterns, wild plants beginning to flower, news from the Cherokee settlement. Her voice was soothing as summer rain. When it was time to leave, she pressed a small bundle wrapped in deerskin into Temperance's hands. For your garden, she explained. Seeds I've saved. Squash, beans, and corn. Plant them together. They help each other grow strong. The ride home seemed shorter somehow, though they took their time. The horses' hooves kicked up the scent of sun-warmed earth, and birdsong followed them up the trail. Temperance held the precious seed bundle close, already planning where to plant each one. At the cabin, Hunter helped her down from her horse, his hands strong and steady. Best get those seeds in the ground soon, he said. Spring won't wait forever. Temperance nodded, but paused before heading to the garden. Thank you, she said quietly, for everything. Hunter ducked his head, embarrassed by gratitude as always. Got chores to do, he mumbled, but his eyes were warm. Temperance watched him lead the horses to the stable, then turned to study the garden plot she'd been tending. There was room enough for Mrs. Greyfeather's seeds, she decided, room enough for many things to grow strong together. Inside Mrs. Greyfeather's cabin, the morning sun filtered through calico curtains, casting warm patches on the plank floor. The healer's gentle hands examined the fading marks on Temperance's arms, where the ropes had cut deep. The scars are healing well, Mrs. Greyfeather said, her dark eyes kind. But there are older hurts here, aren't there, child? Hunter stood by the doorway, hat in hands, trying not to hover, but unable to leave. The cabin's familiar scents of dried herbs and wood smoke reminded him of when Clara had been ill, how Mrs. Greyfeather had tended her through long nights. Your father, Mrs. Greyfeather continued, releasing Temperance's arms. He never told you about your mother's people, did he? Temperance shook her head. He wouldn't speak of her except to say she died when I was small, said thinking on the dead brings bad fortune. Mrs. Greyfeather's face softened with something like pain. I knew your mother, Sarah. She was Cherokee, an orphan girl taken in by a white family, when she was very young. She moved to an old trunk in the corner, opened it with reverent care. The mission school brought her here, thinking they could change her, but she never forgot who she was. Temperance sat very still, her hands clasped tight in her lap. Cherokee? Her voice trembled. But Father always said, your father, Mrs. Greyfeather said firmly, has carried shame that was never his to bear, or yours. She returned with a small wooden box, weathered with age. Sarah was my friend. We learned midwifery together, shared stories, dreams. She had such gentle hands, like yours. Hunter watched as understanding dawned on Temperance's face. Why her father had always seemed to hate something in her features. Why he'd called her lazy and worthless when she worked as hard as any ranch hand. The way I look, Temperance whispered. My build, my darker skin, it's because you carry your mother's blood, Mrs. Greyfeather finished. Strong blood. Good blood. She opened the box and lifted out a small silver locket. Sarah left this with me before she died, asking me to keep it safe until you were old enough to understand. Temperance's hands shook as she took the locket. Inside was a tin-type photograph of a young woman with kind eyes and a quiet smile, features Hunter could now see echoed in Temperance's face. She was beautiful, Temperance breathed. Yes, and so are you, carrying her spirit. Mrs. Greyfeather reached into the box again, removing a folded paper, yellow with age. There's something else. Your mother owned land, 40 acres granted to her by the territory government because of her work with the mission school. The deed was never properly recorded after her death. Your father... She paused. He made sure of that. Tears spilled down Temperance's cheeks, but these were different from the tears of shame Hunter had seen before. These were tears of release, of finding a missing piece of herself. Mrs. Greyfeather held her close, murmuring soft words in Cherokee that seemed to calm the girl's sobs. Hunter shifted uncomfortably, feeling like an intruder on this sacred moment, but unable to leave. Why didn't anyone tell me? Temperance finally asked, wiping her eyes. Fear makes people do terrible things, Mrs. Greyfeather said. Your father feared what others would think if they knew he'd married a Cherokee woman. After she died, that fear turned to bitterness. She pressed the deed into Temperance's hands. But this land, this is your birthright. Your mother wanted you to have it when you were ready. Hunter's jaw tightened as he thought of O'Hara's cruelty, how he'd hidden his daughter's heritage and denied her rightful inheritance. The man's wealth had been built on stolen chances, broken promises. What do I do now? Temperance asked, clutching the locket and deed. You live, Mrs. Greyfeather said simply. You grow strong, knowing who you are. Your mother's people have a saying, water cannot wash away blood. It means our connections to family, to the land. They cannot be erased, only hidden for a time. They stayed through the afternoon, Mrs. Greyfeather sharing stories of Sarah, how she'd learned to birth babies, how she'd sung Cherokee lullabies, how she'd loved to garden. Each word seemed to fill an empty space in Temperance's heart. The sun was low when they finally mounted their horses for home. Hunter noticed how Temperance sat straighter in her saddle, as if a great weight had lifted from her shoulders. They rode in silence through the golden evening light, each lost in thought. Back at the cabin, Hunter built up the fire while Temperance prepared a simple supper. The familiar routine felt different somehow, charged with unspoken words. After they'd eaten, Hunter did something he hadn't done in years. He took down Clara's old family Bible from its shelf. The leather was worn smooth by generations of hands, the pages soft with use. He opened it carefully, hearing Clara's voice in his memory, telling him that God's words could heal what medicine couldn't reach. My wife, he said roughly. She used to read this every night. Said it gave her strength when things were hard. He cleared his throat. Would you mind if I... Temperance's eyes filled with tears again, but she smiled. Please. Hunter's finger found a familiar passage, one Clara had marked with a pressed flower. His voice was uncertain at first, but grew stronger as he read. For you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. The words filled the cabin like a blessing. Temperance touched her mother's locket, and Hunter saw peace settle over her face. The peace of finally knowing she belonged somewhere, to someone. He kept reading, not sure if the comfort was more for her or himself. But as the fire crackled and the spring night deepened outside, Hunter felt something long frozen in his heart beginning to thaw. The deed paper lay on the table between them, a promise of justice waiting to be claimed. But for now, in this moment, the simple act of reading ancient words of hope was enough. Temperance closed her eyes, letting the verses wash over her. Her hand still rested on the locket, as if keeping her mother close. And Hunter read on, his voice growing surer with each line, as if he too was remembering something long lost, how faith felt when it was new and clean, like spring rain washing winter away. The April sun rose clear and bright over the mountain peaks, painting the last patches of snow with gold. Hunter stood at his cabin door, adjusting his rarely worn Sunday collar. His fingers felt thick and clumsy with the bone buttons. "You sure about this?" he called to Temperance, who was still inside. "Yes," came her steady reply. "Mrs. Greyfeather says facing fear head-on is better than letting it chase you." Hunter nodded to himself, remembering how Clara used to say similar things. He'd avoided the Silver Creek Church since her passing, letting grief keep him in the shadows. But today felt different. Temperance emerged wearing her freshly pressed dress, the silver locket gleaming at her throat. She'd braided her dark hair in a crown around her head, just as Mrs. Greyfeather had shown her, a style her mother's people had worn. The sight caught Hunter's breath. Gone was the frightened girl he'd found in the snow. In her place stood a young woman with quiet dignity in her bearing. "You look," Hunter cleared his throat. "Your mama would be proud." A smile touched Temperance's lips. "Thank you." She straightened his crooked collar with gentle hands. "There. Now we're both presentable." They rode into town side by side, their horses' hooves raising small clouds of dust from the warming earth. The morning air carried the scent of pine and new grass. Church bells rang across the valley, calling the faithful to worship. As they approached the white-painted church, Hunter felt Temperance tense beside him. Several townsfolk milled about the steps, their Sunday best stark against the weathered boards. Conversation stopped as heads turned their way. "Chin up," Hunter murmured. "We've got as much right to be here as anyone." They dismounted and climbed the steps together. Hunter opened the door, letting Temperance enter first. The whispers inside hushed to silence. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, catching the silver of her mother's locket. Preacher Matthews stood at the pulpit, shuffling his papers. His eyes widened at the sight of them, and he dropped several pages. As he scrambled to retrieve them, Mrs. Greyfeather rose from her usual pew and walked deliberately to Temperance's side. "Come sit with me, child," she said loud enough for all to hear. "I saved you a place." Hunter followed them to the pew, trying to ignore the stares. Some folks turned away, others whispered behind their hands. But a few, mostly the older widows who remembered Clara, offered small nods of greeting. The organ wheezed to life, and the congregation rose to sing. Hunter's voice was rusty from disuse, but he joined in, remembering how Clara had loved this old hymn. Beside him, Temperance's clear voice rose sweet and true. Preacher Matthews struggled through his sermon, losing his place several times when his gaze fell on Temperance. His message about loving thy neighbor seemed to stick in his throat. But when he spoke of God's grace being sufficient for all, his eyes softened with something like shame. After the final hymn, most of the congregation filed out quickly, creating a wide berth around Hunter and Temperance. But Mrs. Greyfeather touched Temperance's arm. "Would you help me deliver bread to the widows?" she asked. "It's a Sunday tradition, and these old bones aren't as spry as they used to be." Temperance's face brightened. "Of course." Hunter watched as Mrs. Greyfeather loaded her basket with fresh baked loaves, explaining which widow preferred which kind. The older woman's wisdom showed in this simple act, giving Temperance a chance to serve rather than be served, to give rather than receive. They walked together through the quiet Sunday streets. At each modest home, Mrs. Greyfeather introduced Temperance with dignity, speaking of her skill with baking and her kind heart. The widows, many of whom had whispered about her before, now found themselves accepting bread from her hands. "Much obliged," Widow Jensen said softly, her roomy eyes taking in Temperance's gentle manner. "It's been a while since anyone thought to visit." "You're welcome," Temperance replied, her voice steady. "I could come again next week, if you'd like. Maybe bring some of my wild berry preserves?" The old woman's face softened. "I'd like that very much." At each stop, something similar happened. Prejudice began to crack in the face of simple kindness. The women who had once mocked Temperance's size now saw her strength as she carried heavy baskets and helped one widow with her stuck door. Mrs. Greyfeather watched it all with quiet satisfaction. "You see," she murmured to Hunter, "sometimes the best medicine for shame is serving others. It reminds us we all have worth in God's eyes." The afternoon sun was sinking toward the mountains when they finally finished their rounds. Hunter helped Temperance mount her horse, noticing how she sat taller in the saddle now. They rode home beneath a sky painted in shades of gold and rose, the evening light gentle on their faces. The peace in Temperance's expression touched something deep in Hunter's heart. Without thinking, he began to hum the old hymn from church. The melody carried on the evening breeze, and after a moment, Temperance joined in. "I'd forgotten how much I loved that song," Hunter said when they finished. "Clara used to sing it while she worked." "It's beautiful," Temperance said softly. "Like this evening." They rode the rest of the way in comfortable silence, their shadows stretching long across the trail. The mountains stood like guardians around them, and the last sunlight caught Temperance's locket, making it shine like a star against her throat. Hunter realized that for the first time in years, he felt truly at peace. Not the empty peace of isolation, but the fuller peace that comes from choosing courage over fear, from standing beside someone who needed strength and finding your own restored in the process. The cabin came into view, its windows catching the sunset's glow. As they dismounted and began their evening routine of caring for the horses, Hunter caught himself humming that hymn again. This time he didn't stop. The day's victory was small, perhaps. A few hours of dignity reclaimed, a few hearts softened, a few bridges built. But as Hunter watched Temperance move about the stable, her head held high and her mother's locket gleaming, he knew something fundamental had shifted. They had faced the town's judgment together and found it held less power than they'd feared. Like the spring thaw creeping up the mountainside, change would come slowly, but it would come. For now, they had this moment of grace, painted in gold light and carried on the notes of an old hymn, rising like a prayer into the evening sky. The mountain spring melted into summer like honey dripping from a spoon. Each day brought new life to the valley, and with it, fresh changes to the cabin that Hunter Boone had long kept sealed against the world. Now, morning light streamed through spotless windows, and the scent of fresh-baked bread often drifted across the yard. Hunter discovered teaching came natural-like when the student was eager. He showed Temperance how to check his trap lines, explaining the signs that told where animals would travel. "See here?" He pointed to faint marks in the dirt. "Rabbits been using this trail regular. They're creatures of habit, just like folks." Temperance absorbed every lesson with bright eyes. Her hands, once soft from indoor work, grew calloused and sure. She learned to tie knots that would hold in any weather and to read the sky for coming storms. One sunny afternoon, Hunter led her to his favorite fishing spot, a deep pool where the creek lazed around granite boulders. He showed her how to thread a worm onto the hook, keeping his face straight when she squealed at its wiggling. "Now, gentle with the cast," he instructed. "Let the rod do the work." His large hands guided hers through the motion. That's it, nice and easy. Her first catch was a fingerling too small to keep, but her proud grin made Hunter's chest tight with an emotion he hadn't felt since Clara passed. They released the tiny fish, watching it dart away into the shadows. "Next time I'll catch one big enough for supper," Temperance declared. Hunter nodded, knowing she would. The girl had determination enough for 10 people once she set her mind to something. That determination showed clearly in the kitchen. Temperance insisted on teaching Hunter proper baking after watching him struggle with heavy, dense biscuits. "You're working the dough too much," she explained, demonstrating with gentle hands. "Biscuits need a light touch, like handling a baby bird." Hunter's first attempts under her guidance were still a mite crooked, but they rose golden and flaky. "Well, I'll be," he said, breaking one open to watch the steam rise. "Reckon you've got the magic touch." "Not magic," Temperance laughed. "Just patience, and maybe a prayer or two." Prayer came easier these days. They made a habit of saying grace before meals, taking turns to offer thanks. Hunter found himself adding private prayers at odd moments, gratitude for small mercies, for second chances, for the way light caught in Temperance's smile when she mastered a new skill. Their days fell into comfortable rhythms. Mornings meant chores, feeding chickens, tending the growing garden, checking traps. Afternoons brought lessons in frontier craft or quiet, work side by side. Temperance's quick mind soaked up everything Hunter could teach about survival, while her gentle spirit taught him to open his heart again. "You remind me of Clara sometimes," he said one evening as they cleaned fish for supper. "She had that same way of making people feel at ease." Temperance's hands stilled. "Tell me about her." So Hunter shared stories of his late wife, her laugh, her strength, her faith that carried them through hard times. Speaking of Clara no longer felt like reopening a wound. Instead, it felt like sharing a precious gift. The valley flourished as summer deepened. Wild roses climbed the cabin walls, their pink blooms nodding in the breeze. Temperance planted herbs in Clara's old garden boxes, and the air filled with the sweet scent of basil and thyme. One bright afternoon, they heard children's voices on the trail. Hunter tensed, reaching for his rifle, but Temperance laid a hand on his arm. "Wait," she said softly. 3 young girls from town appeared around the bend, clutching bouquets of wildflowers. They approached the gate hesitantly, led by the oldest, who Hunter recognized as Widow Jensen's granddaughter. "Mama sent these," the girl said, holding out her flowers. She says we're sorry for being unkind before." Temperance accepted the flowers with shining eyes. "Thank you. Would you like some fresh lemonade? I just made a pitcher." The girls glanced at each other, then nodded shyly. Hunter watched from the porch as Temperance served them drinks and cookies, speaking gently until their stiff shoulders relaxed, and giggles replaced fearful glances. That evening, after the children left, Hunter found himself studying the bare space above the cabin door. The next morning, he rose early and set to work with saw and plane. By sunset, a new wooden sign hung there, its letters carved deep and clear. "All welcome." Temperance traced the words with her fingers, tears spilling down her cheeks. "It's perfect," she whispered. More visitors came as word spread. Mrs. Greyfeather stopped by regular with medicinal herbs and wisdom to share. Widow Jensen brought her famous apple pies. Even some of the church ladies who'd once turned away now came calling, drawn by Temperance's quiet grace and Hunter's gruff kindness. The cabin, so long a place of solitude, filled with new life. Temperance hung fresh curtains in the windows and placed wildflowers on the table. She hummed hymns while she worked, her voice mixing with bird song and the creek's endless melody. By midsummer, the transformation was complete. The cabin glowed with warmth, inside and out. Hunter found himself looking forward to suppers, when they'd sit by lamplight and share the day's events. Temperance's laugh came easier now, full and free like music. "Never thought I'd see this place so bright again," Hunter said one evening as they finished the dishes. "Reckon you've worked some kind of miracle here." "God works the miracles," Temperance replied. "We just have to be willing vessels." They settled into their evening routine. Hunter in his chair by the fire, Temperance at the table mending clothes. The lamp cast gentle shadows on the walls as they talked of simple things. Tomorrow's weather, the ripening garden, plans for canning summer's bounty. A comfortable silence fell, broken only by the click of Temperance's needle and the crackle of the fire. Through the window, the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Heat lightning flickered over the distant peaks, silent and beautiful. Hunter watched the display, remembering how Clara used to say summer storms cleared the air for new beginnings. The thought no longer brought pain, just quiet gratitude for all that had changed since that winter night when he found a girl tied to his gate. They said their evening prayers together, voices joining in familiar words of thanks. Outside, more lightning danced across the mountains, but inside the cabin, peace reigned, hard-won and precious as gold. Neither of them noticed how the silent lightning was drawing closer, or how the air had grown heavy with the promise of thunder. For now, there was only this moment, the warm lamplight, the sound of cricket song, and the deep contentment of finding family in unexpected places. The peaceful evening dissolved into nightmare, with a single shout piercing the darkness. Hunter bolted upright in his chair, instantly alert. The orange glow through the window wasn't lightning. Flames were already climbing the cabin's outer walls. "Fire!" Hunter's voice cracked through the quiet. "Temperance, wake up!" She stumbled from her small bedroom, clutching her shawl. "What's happening?" "Get your shoes on, now!" Hunter grabbed the water bucket by the door, his mind racing. The flames were spreading too fast for this to be natural. Someone had doused the walls with coal oil. He burst outside, the heat hitting him like a wall. Through the smoke, he caught glimpses of figures on horseback disappearing into the trees. The shapes were familiar. The Finch brothers, O'Hara's ranch hands. Their laughter carried back on the wind, cruel and sharp. Hunter emptied the bucket on the nearest flames, but it was useless. The fire roared louder, consuming the dry timber like paper. Black smoke billowed from under the eaves where they'd stored winter hay. "Temperance!" he shouted, running back inside. The girl was trying to gather precious things: the Bible, her mother's locket, Clara's quilt. "Leave it. We have to go." A beam crashed behind them, showering sparks. Hunter seized Temperance's arm and pulled her toward the door. They stumbled out into the yard just as another crash shook the cabin. The roof was giving way. Temperance screamed and tried to run back. "The locket! Please, I have to—" "No!" Hunter wrapped his arms around her, holding her back as the roof collapsed inward with a deafening roar. Flames shot skyward, carrying sparks and ash into the night sky. The heat drove them further back, until they could only watch helplessly as their home burned. Everything they'd built together vanished into the inferno. Through the flames, Hunter glimpsed Clara's quilt igniting, the careful stitches disappearing forever. The family Bible curled and blackened. Somewhere in the ruins, Temperance's precious locket melted, its chain becoming one with the ashes of their peace. The smoke was too much. Hunter's lungs burned with every breath. He'd inhaled too much trying to fight the flames, and now each cough felt like knives in his chest. His legs gave out, and he sank to his knees in the dirt. Temperance knelt beside him, tears cutting clean tracks through the soot on her face. "Hunter, please, stay with me. Please." He tried to answer but could only cough, each spasm more violent than the last. The world swam before his eyes. He was vaguely aware of Temperance's hands supporting him as he slumped forward. They huddled together in the darkness, watching their sanctuary burn. The flames painted everything in hellish orange light. Neither spoke. What words could capture such loss? The crack and roar of burning timber filled the night, a terrible chorus that seemed to go on forever. Hours passed. The fire gradually died down to glowing embers as false dawn began to pale the eastern sky. Hunter's coughing had subsided to a raw wheeze. Every breath felt like sandpaper in his throat, but he forced himself to stay conscious. Something in his gut told him their troubles weren't over. He was right. Just as true dawn broke over the mountains, hoofbeats approached from the valley. Hunter struggled to his feet, swaying. 3 riders emerged from the morning mist, Sheriff Talley and 2 deputies. The sheriff's face was grave as he dismounted. "Miss O'Hara," he said, not meeting her eyes. "You're under arrest for arson and destruction of property." "What?" Temperance's voice cracked. "No, I didn't. We were attacked. O'Hara's men did this." "We have witnesses who saw you set the fire yourself," Talley said flatly. "Out of revenge against your father, they say." Hunter tried to step forward but staggered. "She's innocent," he rasped. "I saw them, the Finch brothers." "Your word against theirs, Boone," one deputy cut in. "And they were playing cards at the saloon all evening. Everyone saw them there." Talley nodded to his men. They dismounted and approached Temperance, who backed away in terror. "Don't touch her," Hunter growled, but another coughing fit doubled him over. Through watering eyes, he watched helplessly as they seized Temperance's arms. "Hunter!" she cried as they dragged her toward their horses. "Please, you know I didn't do this, please!" He tried to follow, but his legs wouldn't hold him. He collapsed to his knees again, chest heaving as he fought for air. "Sheriff," he wheezed, "you're making a mistake." But Talley wouldn't look at him. The sheriff mounted up, taking the reins of the horse they'd put, Temperance on. She was sobbing now, her shoulders shaking as tears streamed down her ash-stained face. "We'll sort this out proper in town," Talley said, still avoiding Hunter's gaze. "Best see to yourself, Boone. You're not looking well." With that, they rode away, taking Temperance with them. Her crying grew fainter until it was lost in the morning mist. Hunter remained on his knees in the dirt, surrounded by the smoking ruins of everything he'd dared to love again. The sun rose fully, revealing the full extent of the destruction. Nothing remained of the cabin but charred walls and smoldering timbers. The garden was trampled, the fence posts blackened. Even the all-welcome sign had burned, its message of hope reduced to ashes. Hunter's head swam. The smoke inhalation and shock were taking their toll. He tried once more to stand, but the world tilted sideways. The last thing he saw before consciousness fled was the morning sun striking the mountains, painting them blood red against the sky. He collapsed amid the ruins of his dreams, while far below in the valley, a girl who'd become like a daughter to him was carried away in chains, accused of destroying her own salvation. The bitter taste of ash filled his mouth as darkness took him, and with it came the haunting echo of Temperance's final, desperate plea. "Please, you know I didn't do this." But there was no one left to hear. The mountain wind scattered the ashes of their happiness across the empty yard, where not long ago children had brought wildflowers, and hope had bloomed like summer roses. Now there was only silence, broken by the occasional pop of cooling embers and the soft sound of distant hoofbeats carrying innocence away to face injustice. 2 days dragged by like years. Hunter's burns festered despite Mrs. Greyfeather's salves, but the pain in his heart cut deeper than any wound. He'd failed to protect Temperance, just as he'd failed Clara. The thought drove him to move, even when his body screamed for rest. Old Jim Weber, a kindly farmer, lent Hunter his oldest mule after finding him struggling down the mountain path. The beast was slow but steady, matching Hunter's limping pace as they made their way toward Silver Creek. Each step jolted his burned sides where the bandages rubbed raw, but he gritted his teeth and pressed on. The town emerged from the morning mist like a painting half-finished. Smoke still clung to Hunter's clothes and hair, a constant reminder of all they'd lost. He tied the mule outside the jail, his hands trembling as he worked the reins. Inside, the air was thick with the same bitter smoke that seemed to follow him everywhere now. Sheriff Talley looked up from his desk, his face clouding. "Boone, didn't expect to see you vertical so soon." "Need to see her," Hunter rasped, his voice still rough from the fire. "You know I can't allow that. She's under arrest for nothing." Hunter's fist came down on the desk, sending papers scattering. "You know, she's innocent. You know what really happened." The sheriff wouldn't meet his eyes. "What I know is O'Hara signed the complaint himself. Says she threatened to burn down his ranch first, then yours to cover her tracks. His hand saw her do it." "The Finch brothers, they're lying. They were the ones who..." A coughing fit cut him off, doubling him over. "Take it easy, Boone," Talley said almost gently. "You're in no shape for this." When Hunter could breathe again, he straightened up. "Let me see her, please." The sheriff hesitated, then sighed. 5 minutes, that's all." He led Hunter to the cells in back. The reek of smoke was stronger here, mixed with unwashed bodies and despair. Temperance sat hunched on a thin mattress, her dress dirty and torn. Fresh bruises darkened her arms where the deputies had grabbed her. "Hunter?" She rushed to the bars, reaching through. "I knew you'd come. I knew you wouldn't believe their lies." He took her hand, his heart breaking at how small and cold it felt. "Are you hurt? Have they fed you?" "I'm all right. But Hunter, you look terrible. Your burns." "Never mind me. Listen, we'll figure this out. Mrs. Greyfeather is helping. We'll prove what really happened." Tears welled in her eyes. "They won't believe us. Father, he came yesterday. Said this is God's punishment for my wickedness. Said I deserve to hang for what I did." "That's not going to happen," Hunter growled. "I swear it." "Time's up," Talley called from the doorway. Temperance clutched Hunter's hand tighter. "I didn't do it. I would never destroy our home. You believe me, don't you?" "With all my heart," Hunter said fiercely. "Stay strong. Trust in the Lord. I'll be back soon." Talley had to pry them apart. Hunter's burns screamed as the sheriff pulled him away, but the pain in Temperance's eyes hurt worse than any physical wound. Outside, Hunter stumbled down the street toward the church. Surely the preacher would help. The man was always talking about Christian charity and justice. But when Hunter pushed open the heavy doors, he found Reverend Mills deep in conversation with O'Hara himself. The rancher's face twisted with contempt. "Well, if it isn't the mountain hermit, come to confess harboring my criminal daughter?" "Come to expose your lies," Hunter shot back. "Reverend, you have to help. Temperance is innocent. O'Hara's men burned my cabin and framed her." The preacher shifted uncomfortably. "Now, Brother Boone, these are serious accusations. Brother O'Hara is a pillar of our community, a generous donor to our building fund." "So that's it?" Hunter's voice rose. "You'll ignore injustice for a few dollars?" "Mind your tone," O'Hara warned. "The good Reverend knows my character. Unlike some, I attend services regularly, support the church's work. Where were you these past years, hiding in your cabin like a heathen?" Hunter turned to the handful of parishioners preparing for afternoon prayers. "Please," he begged. "You all know Temperance. You've seen her gentle spirit. How can you believe she'd do this?" But they avoided his gaze, hurrying past or suddenly becoming fascinated with their hymnals. None would risk O'Hara's wrath. "I think you should leave," Reverend Mills said quietly. "You're disrupting our peace." Hunter wanted to scream, to shake them all until they saw the truth. Instead, he staggered back outside, his legs threatening to give out. The church steps seemed to sway beneath him. Mrs. Greyfeather found him there an hour later, slumped against the railing. She pressed a cool hand to his forehead. "You're burning up. Those wounds need tending." "No time," he mumbled. "Have to help her." "And how will you do that if fever takes you?" She helped him sit up. "I'm working to uncover the truth. One of the Finch boys, Caleb, has been drinking heavy since the fire. Guilt weighs on him. Give me time to reach his conscience." "Time is what we don't have," Hunter said bitterly. "O'Hara wants her hanged. And God," his voice broke. "God has turned away again, just like with Clara." Mrs. Greyfeather's voice was stern but gentle. "The Lord hasn't turned away. Sometimes his justice works through human hands. We must be those hands." But Hunter barely heard her. The fever was rising, making the world spin. His last coherent thought was of Temperance's tears as he collapsed at Mrs. Greyfeather's feet. Thunder rolled across the valley that evening as clouds finally gathered. The rain began softly at first, then harder, drumming on rooftops and washing weeks of dust from the streets. In his delirium, Hunter thought he could hear the water hitting the ashes of his cabin, carrying them down the mountainside into the river below. The rain fell steadily through the night, as if nature itself wept for innocence imprisoned and justice delayed. But somewhere in the darkness, Mrs. Greyfeather sat with a troubled young man in the back of the saloon, listening as guilt and whiskey loosened his tongue. The truth, like water, would find its way out. It was only a matter of time. Mrs. Ada Greyfeather's hands trembled as she lit the oil lamp in her attic. Rain hammered against the roof, but she barely noticed. Her mind was fixed on one thing: a wooden chest pushed deep under the eaves. For 30 years, she'd kept records of every birth, death, and land transfer involving Cherokee families in Silver Creek Valley. "Guide my hands, Creator," she whispered, easing open the chest's creaking lid. Stacks of yellowed papers filled the space, each one tied with faded ribbon. Her fingers, gnarled from years of midwifery, moved with surprising speed through the bundles. Birth certificates, property deeds, marriage licenses. Some were official documents, others handwritten testimonies from elders long past. Lightning flashed through the small window, illuminating the dust motes dancing around her. There, a packet marked, "Sarah Whitecloud O'Hara." Her heart quickened as she untied the string. The papers inside told a story O'Hara had tried to bury. Sarah Whitecloud, Temperance's mother, hadn't just been any Cherokee orphan. She'd been the granddaughter of Chief Running Bear, whose people had received a legal grant of 5,000 acres in exchange for peaceful settlement. The very land O'Hara's cattle now grazed on. Mrs. Greyfeather's hands shook as she found what she'd been searching for: the original land certificate, signed by territorial authorities in 1848. The seal was still clear, the signatures unmistakable. This was proof that O'Hara's entire ranch operation stood on stolen ground. "Oh, child," she murmured, thinking of Temperance. "Your father's cruelty makes sense now. He's been afraid all along." Thunder crashed overhead as she carefully tucked the document into her shawl. Outside, Her horse nickered nervously in the barn. The storm was worsening, but she couldn't wait until morning. Every hour Temperance spent in that cell was an hour too long. Mrs. Greyfeather saddled her horse with practiced movements, whispering soothingly to calm the animal's storm-spooked nerves. The rain soaked through her clothes as she mounted, but she barely felt it. Her thoughts were already racing ahead to Hunter's makeshift shelter in the burned-out ruins of his cabin. The mountain trail was treacherous in the dark. Mud slicked the path, and twice her horse nearly lost its footing. But Mrs. Greyfeather pressed on, one hand on the reins, the other pressed against her chest where the precious document lay protected. "Steady now," she murmured, both to herself and her horse. "The Lord didn't bring us this far to fail." Dawn was just breaking when she finally spotted Hunter's lean-to, a crude shelter of pine boughs and canvas near the cabin's remains. He emerged at the sound of hoofbeats, rifle ready, then lowered it when he recognized her. "Mrs. Greyfeather, what are you doing out in this weather?" She dismounted carefully, her joints stiff from the cold ride. "I found it, Hunter. Proof of O'Hara's lies, and Temperance's birthright." Hunter helped her to the shelter's meager comfort, his burns still evident in his careful movements. As she explained about the land certificate, his eyes grew wide. "So that's why he's always hated her," he said softly. "She's living proof of his theft." Mrs. Greyfeather nodded. "The town council meets at the mission school this morning. It's time everyone knew the truth." Hunter was already rolling up his bedding. "I'll hitch the wagon." The rain had settled into a steady drizzle by the time they reached Silver Creek. The mission school's bell was just ringing 8 o'clock as Hunter helped Mrs. Greyfeather from the wagon. Her legs were unsteady after the long night's ride. Inside, the schoolroom was packed. The town council sat at the teacher's desk. The mayor, the sheriff, Reverend Mills, and 3 prominent ranchers. O'Hara stood before them, his face thunderous as Hunter and Mrs. Greyfeather entered. "What's the meaning of this interruption?" he demanded. Hunter supported Mrs. Greyfeather to the front bench. Her fingers clutched the document like it was precious gold. Though exhausted, her voice rang clear as she stood. "I bring truth before this council," she declared. "Truth about land, about heritage, and about a father's crimes against his own daughter." The certificate in her hands would change everything. The proof they needed had survived 30 years of dust and darkness, waiting for this moment of justice. The mission church's wooden pews creaked under the weight of the gathered townsfolk. Morning light filtered through dust-stained windows, casting long shadows across anxious faces. Hunter stood at the front, his burned hands trembling as he held Sarah Whitecloud's letter. The paper felt fragile, like autumn leaves ready to crumble. Sheriff Talley shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Next to him, Ephraim O'Hara's face was carved from stone, his knuckles white against the arm of his chair. The air hung heavy with tension and the lingering smell of rain. Hunter cleared his throat. His voice, rough from smoke and emotion, filled the hushed room. "This here's a letter from Sarah Whitecloud O'Hara, written just before she died." He paused, gathering strength. "To my beloved daughter Temperance." The words flowed like clear water, Sarah's love reaching across years of silence. "My precious girl, if you're reading this, I've gone to be with our Creator. There's so much you need to know. Your grandmother was Cherokee royalty, daughter of Running Bear, who made peace with the white settlers. The blood in your veins carries both worlds, and that's nothing to be ashamed of. Your father knows this land was promised to our people. He married me to claim it, then tried to bury the truth along with my body. But you, my beautiful girl, are living proof of both his lies and God's grace." Hunter's voice cracked. Mrs. Greyfeather stepped forward, the land deed held carefully in her weathered hands. "This certificate, signed 30 years ago, proves the O'Hara Ranch stands on Cherokee territory. 5,000 acres granted in exchange for peace. The preacher, Reverend Mills, rose slowly from his chair. Tears tracked down his lined face as he studied the document's official seal. "This changes everything," he declared, his voice thick with emotion. "The charges against Temperance O'Hara are hereby void. She was never the criminal. She was the victim." A murmur rippled through the crowd like wind through prairie grass. Eyes turned to O'Hara, who had gone pale as creek ice. The proud rancher seemed to shrink inside his fine coat, his certainty crumbling like dry earth. Someone in the back, it might have been young Caleb Finch, spat on the floorboards near O'Hara's polished boots. The rancher flinched as if struck. Without a word, he lurched to his feet and stumbled toward the door. The crowd parted, their silence heavier than any curse. Sheriff Talley stood, keys jingling in his hand. "I'll fetch Temperance from the jail." Minutes stretched like hours as they waited. Then the door creaked open, and there she stood. Temperance O'Hara, her dress wrinkled from the cell but her head held high. Her eyes found Hunter's across the room. He crossed to her in 3 long strides, pulling her into a fierce embrace. "You were never disgusting," he whispered against her hair, loud enough for nearby folks to hear. "Just unloved by the wrong man." Temperance's shoulders shook with silent sobs. Mrs. Greyfeather placed a gentle hand on her back, and suddenly others were gathering around them, women who had once whispered behind their hands, men who had looked away in shame. Reverend Mills raised his arms. "Let us pray," he called out, his voice steady now, "for justice done, for truth revealed, for hearts healed and faith restored." The congregation bowed their heads. Sunlight streamed through the windows, touching each bowed head with gold. Hunter kept his arm around Temperance's shoulders, feeling her trembling ease as the preacher's words washed over them. "Lord, we thank you for bringing light to darkness, for showing us that your love knows no boundaries of blood or birth. Help us learn from our blindness. Guide us to be better neighbors, truer Christians, and worthy stewards of this land that was never ours alone." "Amen," the crowd responded, and in that sacred word was a promise of change. Mrs. Greyfeather pressed the land deed and Sarah's letter into Temperance's hands. The girl clutched them to her heart, these precious proofs of her mother's love and her own worth. Hunter watched her face transform with wonder and relief, seeing in it the same grace that had saved him from his own darkness. The morning light grew stronger, touching the tear-stained faces of the congregation as they continued to pray together, their voices joining in hope and repentance. Autumn painted the Colorado Valley in shades of amber and gold. Aspens quivered their yellow leaves against crisp blue skies, while the morning frost sparkled on fallen pine needles. The sound of hammers and saws echoed across Hunter's land as townsfolk worked together, rebuilding his cabin bigger and stronger than before. Temperance watched from the temporary shelter, her heart full as she traced the fresh-painted letters on a wooden sign. "The Gatehouse, for all who need rest," it read in careful strokes. Later that afternoon, she hung it by the new gate, the same spot where Hunter had found her in the snow so many months ago. Within days, the first visitors arrived, 2 sisters fleeing a cruel stepfather, then a widow with nowhere else to turn. Each brought their own stories of pain, but also their own gifts. Sarah could cook, Maria knew herbs, and Rebecca had a way with horses. They found not just shelter, but purpose in the growing homestead. Mrs. Greyfeather's mule cart became a familiar sight on the mountain trail. Every Wednesday, she arrived with books, hymnals, and wisdom to share. Her quiet strength helped heal more than just bodies. She taught the women to hold their heads high again, to remember their worth. Hunter took charge of the stable work, teaching the women to care for the horses that now numbered 6. He found peace in the routine of feeding, grooming, and training. Sometimes he caught himself humming old hymns while he worked, remembering Clara, but without the sharp edge of grief. In the evenings, lamplight spilled from the cabin's new windows. Temperance sat at the long pine table, patiently helping the younger girls sound out words from Mrs. Greyfeather's books. Their faces glowed with pride at each small victory. The cabin rang with laughter now, a sound Hunter had once thought he would never hear again. One evening, as purple dusk settled over the mountains, Temperance found Hunter working at the gate. His knife carved careful letters into the fresh wood. "No one is disgusting here." The words struck her heart like a bell of truth, washing away the last shadows of her father's cruelty. At supper, 12 people now gathered around the table Hunter had built. Bowls of steaming stew passed from hand to hand, heads bowed in prayer, their voices joining together in gratitude. The firelight touched each face in turn, young and old, native and settler, all finding family in this unlikely place. Temperance looked around the table, seeing strength where there had been shame, hope where there had been despair. The gatehouse had become more than shelter. It was proof that mercy could make families from strangers, that faith could build bridges stronger than blood. Mrs. Greyfeather caught her eye and smiled, nodding toward the window where the new sign swayed gently in the evening breeze. Outside, the mountains stood guard over their sanctuary, while stars began to pepper the darkening sky. Thanks for tuning in. These stories remind us that life is more than headlines. It's about heartlines. Subscribe if you want more moments that make you pause, feel, and reflect.